our allies, particularly the Saudis and the Emiratis, feel exposed with respect to Iran, and they have concluded that the United States is not going to deter it. This hedge is not just a signal to the United States. It's not a game to try to bring the United States back in. They think the United States is half gone.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Tobin, editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Syndicate, JNS.org, and you're listening to Top Story, a weekly podcast where I analyze the most important stories happening in Jewish news around the world. Each week, I will break down politics, foreign policy, and culture to provide insights into what is going on behind the headlines. Hello, and welcome to Top Story. Thanks for joining us. Today we have an important conversation with Middle East analyst Michael Doran about events in the region, as well as the significance of the Turkish election. But before we start, I want to encourage everyone to like this video and podcast, subscribe to JNS, and click on the bell for notifications. I also want to remind you that you don't have to wait a full week for more Top Story analysis. There is a daily Top Story podcast where I share more news and analysis with you about the most significant issues we're facing today. You can find the daily show under Top Story with Jonathan Tobin on the JNS channel on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. And now to today's program. The Middle East is in flux. In recent years, long-standing alliances have been shattered and new ones formed. Assumptions about the region and its politics have been exposed as myths, and the need for a coherent and strong American foreign policy that grasps both how much has changed and the need to adjust to new realities has never been greater. But that is not what we're getting from the Biden administration. President Joe Biden ran for president in 2020 as the voice of normality and reason, as well as someone with a wealth of foreign policy experience. But the problem was that almost all of that experience was a function of his being wrong about just about every possible issue for the last 50 years. He's continued that losing streak since entering the White House with a disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan that turned into a humiliating rout. He spent 2 years chasing after Iran in a futile effort to convince the Islamist regime to sign another, even weaker nuclear deal with the United States, only to have them turn him down and move closer to the bomb that he wants to guarantee that they will get anyway. And rather than deterring a Russian invasion of Ukraine, he more or less invited it. In the Middle East, Biden has continued his former boss Barack Obama's feckless policy of not only pursuing a rapprochement with Iran, but in alienating traditional U.S. allies. He's done everything possible to sabotage Israel's strategic position and its government led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. At the same time, Biden has also done his best to alienate Saudi Arabia, while also doing nothing to persuade them or other Arab states to join the Abraham Accords with Israel. To the contrary, American weakness and appeasement of Iran has discouraged them to the point where they are beginning to think that the wisest short-term policy would be to make their peace with Iran, at least temporarily, by letting China getting involved in the region. China, which has been doing its best to buy influence around the world for years, is taking advantage of Biden's lack of foresight. They present not only a credible threat to America's global dominance and security, but their efforts now are part of an effort to bolster an otherwise faltering Iranian regime in a way that helps them and undermines hopes of a wider circle of peace. At the same time, the future of Turkey is up for grabs after an election that saw its Islamist president Erdogan forced into a runoff with his opposition. In the last year or two, Erdogan has been mending fences with both Israel and the West, but it's by no means clear whether he is finished and if that would be good for America or for Russia. But the one thing that has been amply demonstrated is that no matter which way that election or events in Iran go, a Biden administration that still hasn't learned the lessons about the irrelevance of Palestinian irredentism to America's problems in the region, or that demonstrating weakness to enemies is the surest path to make your situation worse, hasn't much of a clue with respect to understanding where to turn next. To discuss all this, we're thrilled to have back with us today one of the leading experts on the Middle East. Michael Doran is a senior fellow and director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at the Hudson Institute. He specializes in Middle East security issues and co-hosts the Counterbalance podcast. He served in the George W. Bush administration and has worked at the Brookings Institution and taught at New York University, Princeton, University of Central Florida. His book, I'd Gamble, was published by the Free Press in 2016. He appears frequently on television and is published extensively. Michael Doran, welcome back to Top Story.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, Michael, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. We have a lot to cover, but I want to start by asking you to explain to us a bit about the Turkish election that was just held last weekend, in which President Erdogan was forced into a runoff. He had been, to some extent, mending fences recently with Israel and the U.S. What are the stakes in this context? And is there any reason for Americans or friends of Israel to worry or be encouraged by this, or the ultimate outcome of the runoff?
Well, what a great question. I think the Turkish election is one of the most consequential events of the year so far, and I think it will probably be one of the most consequential elections of the next few years. Personally, I'm happy to see Erdogan win, and I wouldn't have been too disappointed if Kılıçdaroğlu had won. Well, let me take a step back. I think an Erdogan victory in the runoff election on May 28th is all but assured. I think he nearly got 50% of the electorate in the three-way race this last weekend. And I think he will likely get more like 55 and maybe even higher in the runoff. That's because the major candidate that took votes away from him in the third candidate that took votes away from him in the election on Sunday is an ultra nationalist, and I think that his voters are likely to go to Erdogan rather than to Kılıçdaroğlu, and we'll see if I'm correct about that. But the disappointment of the Kılıçdaroğlu supporters is palpable, and the happiness of the Erdogan supporters is also palpable. Also, Erdogan did much better. Although he didn't succeed in winning in the first round, he did much better than all the pollsters said he was going to do. And this is a story that by now is very familiar to us from Israel with regard to Netanyahu, or the U.S. with respect to Trump, or Hungary with respect to Orban. There's the Brexit in Britain, and there's the international liberal establishment doesn't like these characters and presents and tries to build up the opposition, or maybe just out of wishful thinking, they present a picture that's really not accurate. So my number one message was we need to really wise up and understand what Turkey is. Kılıçdaroğlu's party got 25% of the vote, and Kılıçdaroğlu's party always gets 25% of the vote. So it didn't do it. Everyone stayed in their lane here. There was no big break one way or another. Despite the economic problems in Turkey, which are significant, despite the earthquake, which devastated areas that were strongholds for Erdogan, he still managed to receive the kind of support that he traditionally receives, and Kılıçdaroğlu receives the kind of support that he traditionally receives. And so I think the number one message is we need to wake up to what Turkey is and deal with the Turkey that actually exists, rather than the fantasy Turkey that that people would like to see. And that's when I say I'm happy to see Erdogan win. My primary concern is as an American who thinks that U.S.-Turkish relationship is very important, and who thinks that the people in Washington who have been pushing this idea that we can easily push Erdogan aside, and that the guy who's going to take his place represents something significantly different and something that we're going to like a lot better, is just a complete fantasy. That's my my major point.
Well, that's really interesting, because I know the opposition, for those looking on from the outside who frankly don't know very much about Turkey, and I guess that includes some people in the State Department. I think there was some hope that the opposition might win, and after a generation of the rule of Erdogan's AKP party, that Turkey would return to being the secular partner for the West, and to some extent for Israel, that it was a generation ago. And I guess you're telling us that's a fantasy, and so I get that, but why should we sort of, view Erdogan, who I think has been rightly considered, not a good guy from the point of view of certainly Friends of Israel. He was very close with Hamas. He provoked Israel, and certainly didn't seem to be in line with the values or, the policies of the West. Why should we, sort of make our peace with him? Is he really the best? I mean, sort of like, I guess, is it like Egypt, where, the Sisi regime is brutal, but it's much better than the alternatives? Is Erdogan really the best we can hope for in Turkey?
Well, this is such a long discussion we have to have, because just as in the same spirit in which I just said that what we were led to believe was going to happen in the elections was a fiction. I think that the image that people have of Erdogan and the challenge that he represents to the West is significantly different than what we're told all the time. Of all of the things that where there's friction between the West and Erdogan, the thing that I think is personally that I find most troubling are his relations with Hamas. But I put those in a very different frame than I think most supporters of Israel do. I think they're much more manageable than I think they are. I think the challenge that they represent to the state of Israel is much more limited than we're led to believe, and I think the challenge of working with him on it is a lot easier than we're led to believe. All of the other things that people accuse Erdogan of, I think, are largely false. The Hamas question, yeah, we can delve into, but there are. It broke in the news today. Where I don't know when this is going to, when you're going to publish this, but the news broke today. This is Tuesday, midday, that France is probably selling weapons to Armenia, armored personnel carriers at this point, possibly missile defense systems. This is came. Among other places, was reported in I-24. I don't think we have a really serious confirmation of this yet. That we'll wait for that before drawing any big conclusions. But here you have France, France getting closer and closer. It's certainly true that France is getting closer and closer to Armenia, which is an ally of Iran, which is also receiving weapons from Iran, which is a satellite of Russia. And we have France also is the party in the EU that is responsible for Hezbollah not being designated as a terrorist organization in the in the EU. Why? Because France wants to do business with Iran in Lebanon, and so if we focused in on the behavior of France, what France's relationship with Armenia does in terms of weakening deterrence, all of the positions that France took in the last year or two with respect to Russia, you could make a case that France is weakening the West, that France is taking positions that are supportive of one of the most threatening organizations with respect to Israel, that is Hezbollah. And we could get quite worked up about it. Now, I think all these things France is doing are not good things, but nobody is honing in on them like they do on a few of Erdogan's qualities and saying that this is a great threat to the West. Now, a year or two ago, when the whole question of the S-400s that Erdogan got from Russia was in the forefront of everybody's mind. The line was, Turkey is a Trojan horse of Putin in NATO. But now that we have the Ukraine war in front of us, and we see that the Turks are one of the most staunch supporters of Ukrainian sovereignty, and that without the Bayraktar drones and a lot of the other military support that Turkey is providing, we wouldn't have the kind of staunch resistance to the Russian invasion that we've got. In other words, Turkey is a pillar of NATO with respect to the thing that NATO was created for, that is to contain Russia. It's doing a much better job than France is, and that needs to be our starting point. What do we want from Turkey? We want Turkey to counterbalance Russia, and to a certain extent Iran, and if it does that, then we can work on all of the other things.
Well, anybody with any sense of history knows that Russia and Turkey are, perennial, rivals, enemies, dating back to the Tsarist times. I guess what you're saying is that that's still alive. What are Russia's, and yet, it's very complicated, these various intertwining relationships between these countries. I want to get to Armenia and Azerbaijan a little later. But, what is Russia's stake in this very complex game with, Turkey? Russia is in Syria, Turkey is in Syria. What role does Erdogan play in all this? And, and again, I just want to, you can delve a little bit, deeper into, the Turkey-Hamas thing, if you like, because I think for a lot of people, certainly, especially friends of Israel, the assumption is that Turkey's embrace of an Islamist party, was, an all-encompassing bad thing, and that this lost Turkey for the West, lost Turkey for the cause of anything that was good. And I guess what you're saying is that Turkey is still, it has the same strategic interests that it always had vis-a-vis Russia and the West, no matter who is running it, no matter the character of the regime or the reigning party.
That is pretty much my view. I would say that Erdogan has been engaged. The thing that I find most troubling about Turkey's posture in the world today is that it is balancing Russia and the United States, and so there's a lot of ways in which even as Turkey opposes Russia staunchly in Crimea, in Ukraine, including, by the way, it's never accepted the annexation of Crimea. Even as it does that, in other ways it engages in transactional in a transactional relationship with Putin. Often strikes deals of mutual benefit. But one of the benefits that Erdogan sees is he sees that Russia as a counterbalance to the United States. But here I don't blame him. It upsets me to see it, but I blame the United States for this, because the United States is arming, training, equipping, and supporting diplomatically the PKK in northeast Syria.
Explain who they are and where they figure in all of this.
The PKK is the Kurdish terrorist organization that seeks to divide the Turkish state into two parts: a Turkish state and a Kurdish state. And it has a presence in northeast Syria, because the Kurdish settlement in that part of the world, in Syria, is simply an extension of the settlement in Turkey. And so we're calling them the YPG, or the Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF or the YPG, but it is the PKK. And if you really push American officials about this when they're testifying before Congress, they will admit it is the PKK. And this is the thing. This is the equivalent. What the United States is doing to Turkey through that policy would be the equivalent of the United States arming, training, and equipping Hamas in the West Bank, or in Jordan, so that it could carry out attacks into against Israel in the West Bank. If the United States was arming, training, and equipping Hamas, Israel would be up in arms about it, and Israel's supporters would be up in arms, and quite rightly so. So the Turks have been asking, the United States has been at this since before 2015, and the Turks have been asking the United States politely and insisting and pressuring and complaining about it, and we continue to tell them to sit down and shut up. That this is what we have to do for our national security, right on their border.
Isn't this part of the sort of the Syrian civil war, where the United States was opposed to Assad, who was who was saved by Iran and Russia? Is that part of it? Is that a leg to stand on for U.S. policy?
No, well, I would tell the story very differently, because if we go back to 2015, when in July of 2015, the JCPOA was completed, and immediately after its completion, Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force, flew to Moscow and cut the deal with Putin that created the Russian-Iranian alliance, and then Russia and Iran together did a major buildup in Syria to support Assad, and they began in earnest delivering forces and carrying out a major campaign in about September of 2015, and the fight was over Aleppo at the time. At that time, Erdogan was staunchly anti-Assad, wanted to topple Assad, and President Barack Obama did not want to do that. In fact, he was, basically what he really wanted was the JCPOA, and he wanted to cut a deal with Russia and Iran on the whole region. That worldview has not disappeared, by the way. It's still with us in one form or another in the Biden Biden administration. And there were three powers that were standing in the way of this Russian-Iranian condominium over Syria with the tacit support of the United States, and those powers were Israel, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. Now, unfortunately, those three powers don't work well together, and each took its own position on this. But the Obama administration responded to each by attacking them with respect to values. It's the values play. Mohammed bin Salman was a dictator, and Bibi Netanyahu was a extremist settler. And Erdogan was a Kurd-killing Islamist, and this is the message that the supporters of Obama's policy put out, and the White House, to a certain extent, put it out quietly. But you'll remember back then, when this fight for Aleppo was going on, you'll remember the Turks shot down a Russian jet, and that was penetrating Turkish airspace, and Obama defined that event not as a NATO ally being threatened by Russia, the enemy of NATO, but as a dispute between friends, between Russia and Turkey, and he left the Turks out on their own to handle Moscow. Now, Israelis should understand this very well, because they essentially were placed by the United States in the same position toward the Russians as the Turks were. That is to say, they suddenly had to go to Moscow. Netanyahu started going every other month to Moscow to negotiate with Putin, because they no longer had the United States acting as the intermediary or the defender of them and their interests in Russia. So they had to go cut their own separate deal. The Israelis then find, when the Ukraine war breaks out and all of a sudden the United States is suddenly hostile to Putin, and the Israelis are not as hostile because they have Putin right on their northern border where the United States put him. And then the Biden administration turns to the Israelis and says, "How can you be so immoral?" And the Israelis, of course, say, "We're not immoral. We have to deal with Russia because you put him here, right on our northern border." Same thing with the Turks. The U.S. stuck Putin on the Turks' southern border, and he had to start cutting his own deals. But then, to make it worse, the U.S. built up the PKK, and that was as much to block the Turks in Syria as it was to defeat ISIS. And they as they were deepening their relationship with the PKK, the Obama team called Erdogan, a dirty Islamist who was supporting ISIS, which was never ever true. It's all nonsense.
Yeah, it's complex. Before we move on from Turkey, explain to us, what is the direction of Turkey's relations with Israel? It's been at times very hostile in the last decade or more under Erdogan, and sometimes much less hostile. We've mentioned Hamas, but also Turkey remains, Turkey still has relations with Israel. Off and on, a lot of Israelis have, Turkey is a vacation destination. Is that relationship always good? Is it fated to remain, sort of this very difficult and, twists and turns? Or is there a chance that Erdogan, sort of has been weaned from his hostility to Israel and is willing to sort of play a productive role there?
I think it's complex. There's always going to be friction between some friction between Israel and Turkey, and that's rooted in the Turkish society, and there's a lot of support in Turkish society for the Palestinian cause, or enough support that relations are never going to be perfectly smooth. We're not going back to what we had in the 90s, which was a relationship built primarily on the military to military relationship, and one where there was where the Turkish military and the Israeli military pretty much saw the same picture of the Middle East. I don't think we're going back to that.
Which is kind of the way Israel's relations with Egypt are now.
Right. Yes. I mean, it's unfortunate that we won't go back. I mean, if it happened, I'd be delighted because I think it's very much in the interest of the United States to have Turkey and Israel being having wonderful, cordial, at least cordial, or even productive strategic relations, even better. But so you have to start from the baseline that we're not going back to that. But that doesn't mean that this is going to be Israel versus Abdel Nasser or Israel versus Saddam Hussein or something like that. It's going to be a transactional relationship, and here's where it gets I think really difficult is that or frustrating, particularly for the Israelis, is that a lot of their relations with Turks are going to be determined by Turkey's relationship with the United States. The Turkish-Israeli relations are going to be held hostage to a certain extent to Turkey's relationship with the rest of the world. And that's where, I've had, over the last couple of years, I've frequently had friction with with people in the pro-Israel community. I consider myself to be a card-carrying member of the pro-Israel community. But I've been at odds with them or kind of sideways with a lot of people on this particular issue. And that's because I don't think the United States should, and I don't think it's even good for Israel if the United States determines its attitude toward its major allies on the basis of how they're feeling about each other at any one given moment. So the United States it needs Turkey because it anchors the northern Middle East, and it is the bulwark against Russia, and it always will be for historical reasons. Even if somebody, I don't think Erdogan ever wanted to switch from the West, to Putin, or undermine NATO to help out Putin. But even if you have a guy in Ankara who sees Turkey's relations as best served by good relations with Moscow, Turkey will still be a bulwark against Russia, because this is historic, demographic,
Mm-hmm.
and they butt up against each other. It's geography, right? It's geography, and I think that the most important thing for Americans to understand, particularly the president, is that everything that Vladimir Putin has done since 2008 intervention in Georgia is an attempt to surround Turkey. Or let's say it's not simply that, but it can be understood that way. That includes the annexation of Crimea. It includes the support for Armenia. It includes the intervention in Syria, and it includes the intervention in Libya. And if you look at it that way, you see him laying down little packets of power all around Turkey and opposite Turkey in the Mediterranean. The Turks are very much aware of this, but the United States and NATO have not defined it that way. And what's happened, just like as I was mentioning before about Israel with regard to the Russians in Syria, the Turks have no choice but to negotiate with Putin about a lot of their interests as a result of the expansion of Russian power all around them. At the same time, though, they have been contesting the Russians in all of those arenas, every one of them, and they have killed Russians in Libya. They've killed Russians in Syria. They have killed Russians by proxy, or they have killed Russian proxies through their proxy in the Azerbaijan-Armenia war. They are the bedrock of the Georgians and the Azerbaijanis stand on the shoulders of the Turks. So without Turkey, we have a South Caucasus that's controlled by Russia.
Well, that's a good segue. Looking north and to the east from Turkey, speaking of geography, you've been reporting on changes going on in some of the former Soviet republics, Azerbaijan and Armenia. The Azeris are allies of Israel and friendly with the United States, while Armenia has been locked in a war with the Azeris over a territorial dispute and have been aligned with Iran and Russia. Explain to us a bit, if you could, why these two countries that are rather obscure to Americans are important, and whether that correlation of forces is changing at all, and if so, why?
Well, the key country there is Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan's independence is of great importance. I was going to say vital importance to the United States, but a vital interest means you're actually willing to go to war for it. I don't think the United States is ever going to go to war for Azerbaijan, but I think that the United States should see Azerbaijan as an extremely important country strategically. And that's for several reasons. One is very simply the energy security of the West, and that's something that wasn't on the forefront of anyone's mind until the Ukraine war. But with Europe dependent on Russia for 40% of its gas, when the war broke out in Ukraine, everyone in the West suddenly realized that was an untenable situation. And the only way to get gas resources from Asia to Europe that Russia or Iran don't control is through Azerbaijan, either from Azerbaijan or through it. Azerbaijan is delivering a lot of gas to Europe now through the Southern Gas Corridor, which starts in Azerbaijan, goes through Georgia, Turkey, Greece, Albania, and then it terminates in Puglia and in Italy. Across the Caspian is Turkmenistan, which has the fourth highest gas reserves in the world. And if we could build a gas pipeline from Turkmenistan over to Azerbaijan and then onto Europe, that would pretty much solve the gas problem, or go a long way towards solving the gas problem of Europe. Now, that's a very, very heavy lift, because the regime in Turkmenistan has been historically resistant to doing this, primarily because it's going to anger Mr. Putin. And Putin basically gave the Berdi Muhammadov, the father. The son is now ruling, but the father, he pretty much gave him this sort of gold or lead deal. We'll either pay you off or we'll kill you. If you don't do what we want. If you do what we want, we'll pay you. You can become very rich, and if you don't do what we want, we'll kill you. And that's historically where it's been. Now, the Chinese are also consumers of Turkmen gas, so whether that will happen or not, we'll have to see. But then there's also Kazakh oil. The Kazakhs are starting to move oil across. Most of their oil goes out through Russia, through the CPC pipeline. But if we want to bring Kazakh oil to Europe, it's got to go through Azerbaijan. And we should see that both as energy security, but also as a way of expanding the autonomy of the Central Asian republics, which is in the interest of the United States. If we're in a global struggle today with Russia and China, with China as a senior partner, then the autonomy of those Central Asian republics is a U.S. national interest. It's a European, it's an Israeli interest. And Azerbaijan, when viewed from Moscow, Azerbaijan is the cork in the bottle of Central Asia. If there's Russian hegemony over Azerbaijan, then those landlocked countries in Central Asia don't have an economic lifeline to the West. Their populations are all looking to the West. It's a real asset for the United States. I mean, it's one of the most amazing things about the world these days. If you look at, in Iran, the population is westward looking even while the regime isn't. Same thing with the populations in Central Asia, but the regimes would like to move, unlike in Iran, the Central Asian regimes would like to move in the direction of the West, but they have, historically, they're under such, they're under the thumb of Putin. The Azerbaijanis are they are not members of the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization. That's the military instrument through which Putin is trying to recreate the Russian Empire. They're also not members of the Eurasian Economic Union. That's the economic element of Putin's imperial project, unlike Armenia, which is a member of both. So the Azerbaijanis have managed to pull free of the Russian Empire without Western intervention, without any considered policy on the West to try to force Azerbaijan to do that. They've just done it on their own through their guts and their savvy, and they've done it by allying simultaneously with Turkey and with Israel. And that's one of the things that I find so interesting is this triangle between Ankara, Baku, and Jerusalem. Increasingly, I think the Israelis, the news today is that the Israelis are selling 2 satellites, military satellites, to the Azerbaijanis. The Israelis get 30% of their oil from Azerbaijan. It goes a pipeline that goes from Azerbaijan through Georgia, Turkey, and then down to the port of Ceyhan. About once a month, I think you've got a tanker, or even more than that. I think you have a tanker that's sitting in Ceyhan and then coming down to Israel to provide the Israelis with their oil, and that is a kind of mini-lateral alignment that I think the United States should be working to build up and strengthen. It's going to be good for Israel. It's going to be bad for Russia, but also it's going to be very bad for Iran. And this is one of the most interesting things I think about Azerbaijan. Something like 1/3 of all Iranians are Azerbaijanis. ethnically. And Azerbaijan is growing stronger, and the Azerbaijani ethnic feeling inside Iran is growing. Now, we don't know if that's a full-blown nationalist sentiment that includes a desire to amalgamate with the country of Azerbaijan, or is it just a desire to have their education in their own language? They're not allowed to be educated in Azerbaijani in Iran. We have to wait and see, but this scares the Iranians to death. There's no doubt that one of the reasons why, or there's no doubt in my mind, I can't prove it to you, but I think it's pretty clear that one of the reasons that Israel has penetrated Iranian society so much better than any other intelligence service is because of their relationship with Azerbaijan. So from a Western point of view, if you're looking to push back against Putin and you're looking to push back against Iran, there is no country that is better placed to do that than Azerbaijan, which is the only country in the world that borders both Russia and Iran.
Is there any chance of Armenia slipping out of Russia's grasp, or is that a pipe dream?
It's not a pipe dream, in my view, but it's very difficult for this reason. Prime Minister Pashinyan, if you follow Pashinyan's statements and actions, it's very difficult to figure out what he wants. I think I know exactly what Ilham Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan, wants. I mean, he's pretty much an open book about what his national aspirations are. But Pashinyan is a lot harder to read, partly because he's weaker, but partly it's also because he can't, if he pursues a policy of independence from Russia, he has to give up his claims to Karabakh, which is the disputed the territory that's in dispute. Now, the international law and almost every power on earth regards Karabakh as Azerbaijani, but Armenia has had control of it since the breakup of the Soviet Union, and they're not going to remain in control of it. The power differential is such that they are going to give up. They're going to give up that territory, and the Armenians that are there are either going to have to go to Armenia proper, or they're going to have to take Azerbaijani passports and get some kind of guarantees from the Azerbaijanis and certified by the international community that their welfare will be respected and their their rights respected. But that's an unacceptable position in Armenian politics. But if he could give up Pashinyan on those claims, then he could normalize with Turkey and with Azerbaijan, and he could become Armenia could move closer to this alignment of Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. And that way pull away from Russia. Now, there would be a struggle there, and Pashinyan, is probably afraid that if he were to do that, he would lose his life. A previous prime minister tried to do this, and in fact did lose his life. Was shot in Parliament for trying to do it. So, if he goes again, the only way he can really go against Russia is by joining with Turkey, and if he that's politically unacceptable at home. As long as he wants to keep the aspiration of Armenian control over Karabakh, which is increasingly a pipe dream, then he's dependent on Russia and Iran.
Now, much of the first years of the Biden administration's foreign policy was, absorbed by a futile quest for a new Iran nuclear deal. Given that Iran is close to Russia and helping them in the Ukraine war, which has become the administration's seeming sole concern in the last year, that quest has been put on ice. But does that mean that the U.S. has moved any closer to Israel on the question of stopping the Iranian nuclear threat? And if not, what is its policy or intentions towards Iran?
No, I don't believe it's moved closer to Israel at all. And that I'm not sure where the pro-Israel community is on this. I see lots of wishful think. I'm talking about in the hearts of people, but I see lots of wishful thinking that's happening. I was at a Washington Institute for Near East Policy event a couple of weeks ago where National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that if Israel had to go it alone, the United States would give it a free hand against Iran. And I saw that statement met with deep skepticism by some people, and other people in the crowd were heartened by it, and they saw it as a sign of the United States moving closer to Israel. First of all, I don't believe that. I don't believe that the administration would give Israel a free hand. I think it would do everything to restrain Israel, because if we get to that point where all that stands between Iran and a nuclear weapon is Israeli military action, that means that the United States has decided that it is not in its interest to deter Iran through military action. And if Israel takes action without the United States, there's a good chance the United States gets sucked into that conflict, not in a manner of its choosing, and it's not going to want that. It's not going to want that either. So this is a meaningless rhetoric, which is designed to cover up the fact that they are not doing anything to deter Iran, anything meaningful to deter Iran at this moment from progressing toward a nuclear weapon. There's lots of things that they're throwing up, the kind of smoke screen, integrated missile defense through CENTCOM, I2U2, the relationship with the Indians and the Emiratis, together with the United States and Israel, and so on. Normalization with Saudi Arabia that suggests that they have some kind of larger strategic picture that they're moving toward, but it's a lot of hooey. Some of those things are real, very much real, but none of them is going to deter Iran from its quest for a bomb.
Yeah. I mean, well, I guess just to follow up on that, if I think we agree that this administration is doing nothing serious to stop Iran's nuclear quest, yet it's been thwarted in their effort to, sort of get them to sign a nuclear deal, which would in the end guarantee that they got a bomb. And yet it's also angry at Iran for helping Russia. What is its policy towards Iran right now? I mean, it seems to be mostly confused.
I think they're still aiming for a deal. The negotiations there's been a spate of newspaper articles that have come out about different things. There was one in the Wall Street Journal about Europe is pushing the United States to do more on Iran. And my big takeaway from that article is that there's clearly a lot of talk going on. They were twice this year. They were close to, or twice in the last, I guess it wasn't this year. I've gotten confused already. Twice last year in 2022, they were this close to the deal in February and in August, I believe. In February, it was the issue of the IRGC designation, lifting the IRGC designation. The U.S. refused, and that scuttled the deal. And in August, what was it that happened? It's kind of slipped my mind at a moment. But anyway, both times the deal slipped away, but they had already started to believe. They were preparing the groundwork for the announcement of the deal, and they clearly the delivery of Iranian drones to Russia didn't have any impact on that desire. I think the uprising in Iran didn't have any impact on that desire. All the same players are there, and they have a worldview that says it's better if the United States has some kind of arrangement with Iran, both in the region and with regard to the nuclear question, and that it doesn't see itself, the United States doesn't see itself as the leader of a coalition that involves Israel, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, others, to contain Iran. They just don't see the world that way.
Yeah, these are the same Obama alumni that, did the first nuclear deal. So is it a realistic, is it realistic that Iran might finally, after 2 years of saying no and stringing, Biden and Blinken along, that Iran will sign another nuclear deal, obviously a much weaker one than the original one? Is that something, if they're still pursuing it, is it possible that that's what they're going to, Iran will eventually just say, okay, you've given us a deal we like?
Oh, sure. Yeah. If they can.
You expect it?
If they can, let's put it this way. Do I expect it? I think it is entirely in the hands of the Iranians. They have the initiative. If they decide that it's better for them in terms of the different, the interests that they want to balance, to come to some kind of arrangement with the United States, they'll do it. If they decide it's not, they won't. It's not because the United States isn't there for the deal is there. If the Iranians decide to take it, we're not taking it off the table. Now the deal. What's the deal? The deal is we can't go back to the JCPOA. The world has the Iranian program has progressed too far. They're not going to roll back their program. So it's going to be some new deal where, if it appears, where they agree to restrictions on their stockpiles, restrictions on the numbers of centrifuges, the levels of inspection by the IAEA, and so on, in return for some suite of inducements that they're going to get. And so they'll weigh it at any given moment, and depending upon what's going on in the world. And if they want to buy some time, they'll go ahead and do it. And if the inducements are big enough, they'll take it. It won't hurt them to do that. But they will do it on the same terms that they got the JCPOA, which is that their program continues to move forward.
Yeah, on their terms.
On their terms.
Related to that, one of the major events recently in the region is the intervention of China, and their apparent success in brokering what is at least a temporary rapprochement between the Saudis and Iran. How does that figure in to the quest to deter their nuclear quest, and was that a direct consequence of U.S. appeasement and weakness?
So, with respect to the latter part of your question, yes, I think absolutely. It's a direct consequence of the United States refusing to use offensive countermeasures against Iran. Our allies, particularly the Saudis and the Emiratis, feel exposed with respect to Iran, and they have concluded that the United States is not going to deter it. It's not going to deter it in conventional terms, and it's not going to deter it in with respect to the nuclear to its nuclear program. And so the only choice they have is to try to engage Iran diplomatically. And they're hedging then toward China, both because China has more influence over Tehran than Washington does, and because they want to send a message to Washington that there will be consequences for America refusing to defend its own allies and the alliance structure that it built, and because they conclude from the unwillingness of the United States to carry out these offensive countermeasures against Iran, that the United States really is on the way out in the Middle East, and that the U.S. keeps sending that signal to them in a lot of different ways. And I don't think you or I, if we had a gun to our head, could we, Jonathan, could you promise your children that the United States will be the dominant power in the Middle East in 10 years' time?
I don't think there's any reason for anybody to think that.
Yeah, we haven't given anyone a reason to believe that. I mean, Joe Biden went to Riyadh and he insisted that was the case, but the mere fact that he had to insist it out loud showed that felt the need to do it, showed that there's a very serious problem there. And the minute he left, or shortly after he left, the Saudis invited Xi Jinping to come to come to Saudi Arabia, and not just come to Saudi Arabia, come and be feted in a way that Biden wasn't, and you have these summits with the other Arab states set up and so forth. So the leaders in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, they're convinced the United States is on the way out, and China has convinced them that China is on the way in. So for that reason, this hedge is not just a signal to the United States. It's not a game to try to bring the United States back in. They think the United States is half gone, so they're starting to hedge their bets. Now, the interesting thing that I think has been revealed by this whole thing, where I think it's really interesting or complex, is this whole thing being the deal that China brokered between Iran and Saudi Arabia, is that it has revealed between that deal and between that and the trip of Xi Jinping to Saudi Arabia that preceded it, has revealed how important Saudi Arabia and the UAE are to China. And China is on both sides of the Gulf now. And it isn't simply Iran's ally against the U.S. alliance system. It's playing on both sides, and the Iranians have been downgraded in the Chinese position somewhat. The Chinese, I understand, also were annoyed with the Iranians after the JCPOA in 2015, 2016, because they had supported the Iranians much more than the Americans had. But the minute it came time to give out contracts after the JCPOA was signed, the Iranians started trying to curry favor in the West, or make connections in the West, and that annoyed the Chinese. So the game is the game is a complex one, and Iran and China are not perfect allies. And the Chinese have a lot of other interests in the Gulf as well, and that might be, back to your previous question about the JCPOA, or return to it. That might be part of the reason the Iranians would consider some kind of new deal, because they don't want to be relegated in this complex diplomatic game to the position of just being in China's pocket all the time. They want the Chinese to have to work for them a little bit too.
Yeah. Does this new development with China and Iran and the Saudis render any expansion of the Abraham Accords, that might include the Saudis or other nations in the Gulf, a pipe dream? I mean, is that done for now, as long as they perceive the United States is on the way out of the region?
Yeah, I think so. I probably wouldn't put it quite as. It depends. It depends on what you mean by Abraham Accords. I think clearly the Abraham Accords are here to stay. The ones that have been signed. Sudan might be up for grabs a little bit, but UAE, Bahrain, Morocco. This is here to stay, and it's mutually beneficial. Especially these economic arrangements, but expansion of if we're thinking of the Abraham Accords as the Trump administration understood it, I believe, or at least key people in the Trump administration understood it, and that is as a geostrategic tool of the United States for putting together an American alliance system designed, among other things, to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon and to contain it on the ground. No, it's not there. That's not the view that the Biden administration has of it. The Biden administration now, remember when it first came into office,
for sure,
it wouldn't say the words. It wouldn't say the words Abraham Accords. Yeah. But now they do. Now they do, and now they say they love them and everything. But what they're talking about is just particularly, it's just because one, they realize how silly they look not saying Abraham Accords. And they even now will say that they want to try to, promote normalization of Saudi Arabia and Israel. And that, of course, is that's the prize, the strategic prize here. But the Saudis are not going to do that if they're not going to get from the United States what they want from the United States, which is...
And they certainly won't get it from the Biden administration. Possibly, if Biden lost in 2024, I guess that puts it into play again, but not with this current administration.
I don't think so. I'll be very surprised. Why? The Saudis, anything that they want from Israel itself, they can get without the Abraham Accords. I think this is something that normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel is something that the Saudis would be doing as part of a framework with the United States. But that requires the United States to go back to the previous conception it used to have of its role in the region, and the Obama-Biden teams have pretty much killed that.
Yeah. Well, the one good thing you could say about Biden's foreign policy is that he hasn't gone, like all of his predecessors, down the rabbit hole of chasing an Israeli-Palestinian peace plan. But the administration is still very intent on undermining the Netanyahu government and return to trying to bolster the Palestinians with very little success. Where do you see the Biden administration heading on this issue in the next year? And do you think a reelected Biden, assuming that's, certainly it's a possibility, might be tempted to try again to broker a two-state solution or some other mythic quest?
Well, no, I think everyone recognized at a certain point, under the Obama administration, they came in believing that they were going to get an Israeli-Palestinian peace. And Obama, when he had George Mitchell working for him, he was going to have a comprehensive peace. It was going to be Syrian and Palestinian tracks together. We were going to have this big Geneva-style Kumbaya fest. And they convinced themselves during the George W. Bush administration that it was Bush's failure to seize the opportunity that was keeping the Syrian and Palestinian tracks from moving forward. So they came in with the idea that this was going to happen, and then they got a cold shower of reality, and they realized at a certain point, it took a long time, but they realized at a certain point that there was not going to be there was not going to be progress in either one of those tracks. And from that point on, the Palestinian issue became an issue to beat up the Israelis with, in particular to beat up Netanyahu, while Obama pursued this realignment with Iran. This is what I mentioned early on when we were talking about Turkey. In each arena, with respect to each one of America's major allies, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Turkey, as the Obama administration moved toward Iran, they had some club in their hand to beat up the allies with if the allies dared say, hey, we don't like the direction you're moving in. So the Palestinian issue was the club they beat up the Israelis with. The Biden administration came in, and they are, as we mentioned, they're all the same members, the same team. And they recognize that there's no there with regard to Israeli-Palestinian peace. Abu Mazen is, whatever you think of him, he's just not the guy who's going to make peace with Israel on anything like terms that are possibly acceptable to a majority of Knesset members. And everyone knows that. Blinken knows that. Sullivan knows that. What's prevented or what's allowed Biden not to use it as a club is the fact that the Netanyahu government is so weak at home due to the controversy over the judicial reform, and very significant. All the opposition to Netanyahu is really trying to pull the United States in to use the United States as the club to beat up their domestic enemy, Netanyahu, and that is severely weakened Israel, unfortunately. But they don't. From the Biden administration's point of view, it's a gift because they can. Israel's so wrapped around the axle from its own domestic politics, it isn't in a good position to put pressure on the Biden administration for its non-performance with respect to the Iran question.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think that's Biden would like a weaker Israeli government, a more pliable one, but he's perfectly happy to help keep undermining Netanyahu and to do nothing else. Well, there were lots of other questions, lots more that we could have talked about, but we're just about out of time.
It's so depressing, isn't it? The whole thing is, but the good news, there are two. Let's end on a positive note here.
Okay, please.
One of them is Azerbaijan and the Turkish elections. I know a lot of your viewers are not going to agree with me about this.
Well, but they're still convinced that Erdogan is a bad guy. So that's a revelation to, I think, a lot of pro-Israel people.
They didn't see Kılıçdaroğlu. There are two things that were wrong with Kılıçdaroğlu.
They can't pronounce his name, let alone know who he is. So,
but he was not going to be this guy who was going to come in and solve everything all the problems and challenges that we have with Erdogan. The problems and challenges that we have with Erdogan are the problems and challenges we're going to have with Turkey always. We just need to learn to live with those, and easier to deal with a guy like him who is in control of the country. That's there are these moments that if you look back to past Turkish history when I wouldn't say Ankara collapses, but the country gets very weak and divided. And then it gets reconstituted, and then we can divide it and reconstitute it. And it's better for all of us that it be under a strong leader, I think. I won't push that too hard. We'll wait and see what happens.
Okay. Well, fair enough, Michael. We'll have to have you back on sometime in the future to go back through this and see where we are. I want to thank you for all of your insights. This has been a really fascinating conversation. We also want to thank our listeners. Whether you're watching us on the JNS YouTube channel or listening to us on Google, Apple Play, or Spotify, or any of the other podcast platforms, please like and or subscribe to Top Story, click on the bell for notifications, and give us good reviews. Please write to us at editor@jns.org and tell us where you listen or watch the show and what you think about it. And remember, keep reading and thinking for yourself, and we'll see you again next week.